The Survivors is brought to you by our friends at Schoser Talent and Wellness Solutions. This podcast mentions suicide, mental illness, grief, and loss, and may be triggering for some listeners. So please take care of your mental well-being by pausing or skipping any sections that feel uncomfortable to you. And if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 for support.
I'm really glad that the snort you just made didn't get caught on audio, because people would have been very alarmed. I was alarmed.
Listen, I'm a little bit of an asshole. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, but you're my asshole and I love you. And everyone listening loves you too. So we're back, as we are every week, with another conversation. And I think you all know what the conversation is about. We're talking about suicide in some way, shape, or form. And this one could be a humdinger, because this is a very unusual situation within an already nuanced subject. You following?
Yes.
Okay. So we're already talking about suicide, which is, we all know it's common, but there's a cohort of people in the world. There are a lot of us. I'm one of them, who have had to do something called grieving in reverse. Have you ever heard of it?
Yes, I have.
Well, you're just very well read. That's what that says about you. So it's a little snotty of you to be like, yeah, I've heard of it. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow.
So grieving in reverse is when the truth of someone's suicide comes out after the fact. In my case, 35 years after the fact. And the conversation that I'd love to have today, because I've had a lot of people sliding into my DMs and sending me messages about that happening to them, because they've somehow heard or read that it's happened to me, and it's not a common thing. But I guess maybe it is a more common thing. And the reason for that, big reason for that, is because suicide has been such a stigmatized thing forever. You and I are working very hard to change that. But the truth is, it's been a very stigmatized and taboo thing for a very long time. And so the optics around suicide, that's the thing that is the driver behind a lot of people changing the story when someone dies that way. So if you are listening to this podcast for the first time, or maybe you missed some of our conversations in our first season, where G shared her story of being an attempt survivor, I share my story of being a multiple suicide loss survivor, then if you haven't heard that, I'll give you the 2-second recap about my own story, because it's relevant to this conversation. I lost my father when I was 10 years old. The story that I was told by my mom was that my father had died of a heart attack. He was a very heavy smoker. Even though he was an active man, heart disease ran in his family. There was no reason for my 10-year-old mind to ever question that. So that is the narrative that I lived with in my life for 35 years, until I was 45 years old, and I discovered by accident that my father had actually died by suicide. And that's when not only I became a survivor, but I started grieving for my father for the second time in my life, all over again. Like it was second one of minute one of day one, all over again. And in my case, it wasn't an issue of optics per se. The reason why my mother chose to change the story was not because she was embarrassed or shameful. It was because I was 10 years old, my dad was my person, and I just was going to be devastated for the rest of my life that he was gone. My mother didn't want to add to that pain by telling me the truth that it was a suicide, so she was saving me, which, to her credit, she did. She saved me from a lifetime's worth of a different kind of pain. So I experienced that years later in reverse. And have you ever had that kind of a situation happen?
I don't think I don't think I have. So this is such an interesting topic for me, because I can understand how painful that is. to have believed something your entire life only to have that truth shattered in one conversation,
Mhm.
and then having to go back and relive that pain again, but in a different way. I it rips my heart out to think that here was your mom, because back in the day, like, and even more so back in the day than now, suicide, that topic was highly stigmatized. There was a lot of shame associated with suicide, and for her to want to protect you for the rest of your life, but having found out like 35 years later, it had to have been gut wrenching. And I can't even begin to understand what that was like for you or for others out there that are going through that.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I can only speak, obviously, from my own experience. I can speak, I think, pretty well for my mom because we have had a continued conversation. So I've known this truth about my dad now for 11 years. So I have had a little bit of time to process and to acclimate to the fact that I'm actually a suicide loss survivor. And so has she. And so we have had this 11-year long conversation, which you know all about, and it's just so unbelievably beautiful. But I remember, like, there are defining moments, there are watershed moments in your life. And, I remember where I was when, such and such a thing happened. And you remember the feelings and the smells and the sounds. I remember absolutely vividly, like it happened 20 minutes ago, that conversation that changed the course of my life. And I remember hearing my mother validate. I asked my mother a question I never expected to ask her. I didn't even know I was going to ask it until it was coming out of my mouth. And I asked if my father had taken his life, which I had never had a reason to ask, never thought to ask. I asked, she said yes. And that changed everything in that moment. And I was 45 years old when I asked her that question. The minute it was out of my mouth and my mother responded and said, yes, Daddy did take his life, I was a 10-year-old child sitting in my Aunt Charlotte's silver Opal at the end of my street on the same day that my mother told me in my aunt's car that my dad had died. It was the most surreal feeling I have ever experienced in my life because you have this narrative. Like in my case, I had this narrative for 3.5 decades of my life, for the better part of my life, 3/4 of my life. I had this narrative and I idolized my father. And then all of a sudden, wait, my dad was the one who left? My dad was the one who chose to go? I mean, you talk about a mind fuck. There is no mind fuck that I have ever experienced that is on that level. It is something that is indescribable. And it took me years to even wrap my head around the fact that it could be true because, and you and I have talked a million times about the types of people who are out there who have either tried to take their life or have successfully taken their lives. They're either the people who you don't know anything is wrong or the people who you did know something was wrong and it still happens anyway. We didn't know anything was wrong. So I always had this impression of my father. He was a hero. He was my best friend. He was larger than life. And all of a sudden now he left. So there is just so much deep and indescribable pain that goes along with that. And people have to understand that when all of a sudden you find yourself in that situation, like everything is turned inside out, upside down, and is being shaken all at the same time.
And for me, like, that had to be like the hardest moment in your life. But I'm gonna give credit back to your mom. Such incredible strength, because here she had this little 10-year-old nugget that she had to take care of, and she was making sure that you were gonna be okay, and I'm sure it was, like you said, a mind fuck when you found out the truth. I and I think that, and I could be wrong, but I think this happens a lot more for kids, whose parents had taken their life by suicide and now are finding out, 15, 20, 30 years later, like how that affects them and having to go back and re-grieve again, but like a different kind of grief. And then like all the questions that you have in your mind, it sounds to me like your dad had, high functioning depression. That's me all in one sentence, high functioning depression. And trying to like go back and figure out like what signs did I miss? Why couldn't they be open with me? Same questions that you would probably have today if you found out somebody that you loved had taken their life. But now you're having to go back and rethink about what happened 35 years ago. What might have triggered that? And like I can't imagine that kind of pain.
I can't express that kind of pain because there aren't words that I use words all the time. I write for a living. I talk for a living. I can't even sit here right now and come up with words that would do justice to how that feels. Suffice it to say, it is the deepest, darkest, hardest pain I've ever known in my life. And then what it did for me, and I don't know if anybody listening who has had a similar experience, if you have, please reach out to us. Please reach out to me. Find me on socials. I want to have a conversation with you. G and I want to hear from you. And I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but it ended up kind of altering everything. It almost put this filter. I want to see if I can express this right. It put a filter over everything that I had ever experienced with my father. He was a huge mountaineer. We hiked together. That was our thing. He was a race car driver. I spent so much time at little tracks watching my dad race. He was the property manager for my grandparents' real estate investments properties. I would go and I was like my dad's little buddy, little right-hand person emptying quarters out of the washing machines on Saturdays. And so we were inseparable. And I hyper analyzed every single thing that I could remember that we had done together, and moments and conversations and experiences, and was like, was that real? Was that real? Was he sick then? Did I miss something? I mean, your brain is just, it's like what I would imagine snorting a line of Coke would be like that never wears off to your brain. That you're just now, all of a sudden, you've had this infusion of something that illuminates everything in your brain and makes you look at it twice again and go, wait, what? And that's how it was for me for the longest time. And it's interesting. My husband, Dave, we talk about your wife and my husband a lot on this podcast. Dave, first of all, he was unbelievable with me. From the second I found out, he was the only person that knew besides my mother and me for 3 years. And he was just, talk about a rock. He was just there. And I was just gripping on for dear life. And one of the things that he said to me that was so profound, because I got stuck in this place of like, well, everything's different now. Everything's different now. And one day he just stopped and said, I know you feel like everything's changed, and I totally get why, but nothing's actually changed. He said, every memory you ever had with Dad, the times that you hiked or you were around the track or you were watching Star Trek together when you got home from work, every one of those things happened. And that joy was real joy. And he loved you, and you know that. Like, can you look me in the eye right now and say that he didn't love you? Of course I know my father loved me. And he reframed he saved me from a lifetime of feeling that way with that one comment, because he was right. It just changed the cause of his death. It didn't change the kind of husband he was. It didn't change the kind of father he was. It didn't change the kind of man he was in the world. It just changed how he died.
What if your business could recruit smarter, onboard faster, and support employee wellness all at once? Welcome to Schoser Talent and Wellness Solutions, where people-first strategy meets real results. With over 45 years of combined experience and 16 years specializing in UKG recruiting and onboarding systems, we help small and mid-sized businesses thrive. From the first application to full integration, we streamline your hiring process, reduce time to hire, and deliver seamless onboarding experiences. Our proprietary tools like the Recruiting and Onboarding Health Check and the Employee Mental Wellness Index turn insight into impact. At Schoser, we know that businesses are built on people. That's why we integrate wellness into every solution, promoting mental health, reducing burnout, and creating a culture where talent stays and thrives. Whether you're navigating change, implementing tech, or engaging your team, we tailor every solution to fit your goals. Visit schosersolutions.com today. Let's build a healthier, more productive future, one workplace at a time.
So, because this is a new concept to me, and I'm sure there's hundreds of other people out there, maybe even thousands, that are dealing with grieving in reverse. What are some things that you've done to help you reframe it in your head or help that grieving process?
I think that's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before because I've honestly never had a conversation about grieving in reverse with anyone until today. So this is really cathartic for me too. What have I done? I think above all, I did the thing that I end up doing a lot, which is to give myself permission to sit in it, because when I tell you I was in the Bermuda Triangle of pain, just swimming in this endless black sea of water, and I just needed to float until I found my way to something solid. And I did that for a long, long time. And I think that allowing myself to feel things however I felt them was the biggest favor I did for myself, gift that I gave to myself, whatever you want to call it. I overnight changed from a kid who lost their dad to a heart attack to a woman whose dad took his own life. That is a club that no one wants to ever be in. And you don't have a choice with your membership card. They just give it to you. And I didn't want it. And I fought it for a while. This isn't possible. This isn't me. This isn't what I want to attach to my grief or my father's memory. And you don't have a choice, friends. It now becomes truth. And we have two ways we can deal with it. We either find a way to accept it. We don't have to like it, but we have to accept it for what it is. And we have to somehow let it in and integrate it. And I did that. And of course, I've done something very different, which is, I spend my time now. I became a crisis counselor. I'm on crisis lifelines, taking calls from people who are in that headspace, who don't want to live anymore. That's my way of dealing. I got involved with groups. I started writing about it professionally. I journal about it. That's what I did. I talk about it. And there are so many different ways that people can start that healing. But the biggest thing for me was just to accept that I had to be wherever I was with it in that moment, and that was okay.
Okay, and that helps. I think the other thing is in your head, because we all rebuild anything that's happened in our lives. We have these narratives in our head. How do you go about rebuilding that narrative, but also being kind to yourself at the same time? Well, what I used to believe in was blah blah blah, and now I'm learning that blah blah blah. I'm trying to figure out how, in your own head, how you rebuild that narrative.
That's a great question too. You're very spot on with the questions today. This is very powerful for me. I feel like I'm going to therapy right now. This is actually great. But I think in all seriousness, for me, I had to start from a different place. Some people may start from this place, some people may not. I had a very different belief system about suicide. So I came at the whole concept of suicide and that kind of loss and grief from a place of believing that it was a very selfish act. Now, again, if you don't know my story, I have not just lost my father to suicide. The year before my father died in 1977, when I was 9 years old, my cousin took his life. That was my first experience with death, my first experience with suicide. 4 years ago, one of my closest childhood friends, mine and Dave's, took his own life. So I am a 3-time survivor of this kind of loss. But going all the way back to when I lost my cousin and learned it was suicide and kind of learned in a very 9-year-old way what suicide was, I developed a belief system around what taking your own life meant in my brain. It was nothing I talked about with people, nothing anybody ever fed me to believe, coached me to believe. It came out of my own brain and heart. I believed, well, why didn't they just help themselves? Why didn't they just talk about it? Why didn't they? That was really selfish. That's what my 9-year-old brain felt. And I lived with that very silently in my own heart for 35 years. And then I learned my own father had taken his life. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. What? And for the very, I would say, first few years, there are pictures all over my house of my dad. And I don't have very many pictures of my dad. So believe me when I tell you, the ones are, I don't often show this, but I will show you. The only picture I have on my desk. This is the only photograph that exists of me alone with my father. And it is on my desk every day.
You are cutest little button there.
Oh my God, what is up with that hair? I don't even, Mom, really, what were you thinking with that little hairdo? If you can see, I'm wearing literally like I look like I just got off the Laugh-In show. Me and Goldie Hawn. So anyway, I was talking about photos and things like that. I had them all over my house. And I always, with my children, we have 2 girls. And I always talked about my father like my father was a living, breathing human who was ready to walk through the door any day now. I have always talked about my father to my children and my friends and my family in a very intentional way to make him a part of those people's lives and memories, because I always wanted my kids to feel like my father was part of their life. Even Dave, because Dave never met my dad. So when I found out that my father died by suicide, I wasn't angry at my father for leaving me that way. I was furious at my father for leaving my then 40-year-old mother with a 10-year-old child working part-time as a secretary at the nursing home up the street. I was bullshit at my father for doing that to my mother and changing the course of my mother's life and leaving her without a partner and a best friend and all those things. It took me years to find my way back to my father. And you know how I found it? You know what the path was? It was therapy, first of all. It was therapy, and it was the understanding, revelation, knowledge, epiphany, call it what you want, that suicide is not a selfish act, that mental illness is an illness that needs to be treated and acknowledged, and that my father had it in a time when people didn't talk about it. There wasn't mainstream support for it, and he couldn't bear the pain anymore, so he made the choice to end his life, was the only thing that was in his control. Does that answer all your questions?
It does. I have one more question, if you don't mind.
I don't mind any questions.
How are you honoring your dad's memory now? And how do you honor your truth?
I honor my truth doing this. I honor my truth with you every single week. And I have for however many weeks that you and I have been doing this together, 2 seasons worth. I have a book coming out. I don't talk a lot about it, but it's getting to that point where it's sitting with my publisher right now. And I've spent the last 4 months editing it with my amazing editor. It's coming out next year. It's the story of losing my father twice. I honor him through that. I honor him by creating the platform, the mental health platform that I created and launched last year called the Help Hub. You can find it at thehelphub.co. It's always in the show notes. It is a place that I created that offers easy access to crisis support hotlines, content, tools to help anybody, anywhere, in any community, whether you're in the queer community, the BIPOC community, Latinx, AAPI, elderly, veterans, you name it, helps people find the help and support they need to support their unique needs, because I never, ever, ever want someone to be in the place that my father was in and not get the help that they need. So I honor him like that. I honor him in all of those ways. I honor him whenever I climb another mountain with Dave and the girls. I honor him when I'm there to listen to and support my mom. When she needs to talk about him, I honor him every which way I possibly can.
Okay, so I know it's been a lot of questions this episode, but
I love questions.
I think that, it's interesting for us to talk about this. And so I have one last question, and it may or may not make you cry, and so I'm
Oh,
going to
God.
apologize for that ahead of time.
You never have to apologize for making me cry. I'm a big crier. I cry at everything.
So if you could talk to your dad now, what would you
God,
say?
are you kidding me with that shit right now? Oh my God. As I'm sitting here off camera staring at the photograph I just showed earlier of my father, and he's staring at me with this little smirk on his face. What would I say to my father? I had a conversation with him on Father's Day this year, talking to that picture. Oh God, I don't even look, there it goes. I don't even know if I can say this without crying. It's not even humanly possible. No one has asked me that publicly. And friends, if you're hearing this, don't be sad. I'm not crying sad tears. I'm crying happy tears. God, I would just say that there has not been a day that has gone by that I have not loved you and thought of you and tried my very best. Wow, this is awful. I feel like Peter Brady in the episode where his voice changed. Oh my God.
I'm sure your dad's looking down on you like with a little chuckle. He's like, "You're doing great." And look, I made myself cry. So you know what? We're okay.
I know. I would say that I'm thriving and I'm doing everything that I can in the ways that I know that you would want me to, with the life that I have and with the experience that I have. And I'm trying to make an impact in all the most beautiful ways. And I will never stop. And I love you. That is what I would say. And I know he heard me because the clouds just moved out my window in a funny way. So I know it in my heart he heard me.
I wanted to thank you for sharing your truth with us, because there are so many other people out there that are now just finding out, today, that maybe their mom or dad or an uncle or a grandparent or a child took their life. And that may have happened like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 40 years ago, and now you're having to re-grieve that loss. So thank you for your openness, because, we're in this together as a team, as, an attempt survivor and a loss survivor.
And as a community.
And I'm so fucking proud of you for everything that you put out into this world. So
thank you. I appreciate that more than you know. And I want to leave a couple takeaways if I can, because I know we have a minute or so that I think are important for the people who are listening to this, the people who've slid into my DMs saying, how do I tell my child the truth? Or I just found out this life altering truth. What do I do? Number one, there's no expiration date on grief. There's also no expiration date on the truth. Kids are resilient. Lead with the truth. There is always an age-appropriate way to find something out. One of the weirdest comments I can ever make, that I hope people who hear me say this understand, is that one of the greatest gifts my mother ever gave me is telling me the truth. And she did it at a time when I could handle it and I knew that the world could support me. Number two, finding out the truth later on in life, whenever that may be, does not erase the love or invalidate any kind of original grief that you ever may have. I've grieved twice. I own that. They were two different experiences. They both exist in my life and in my story, and they're both valid. Number three, secrecy, keeping secrets adds layers of trauma. And they can be healed, though, by having conversations. like this, or with anyone, or with a therapist, or with a friend. And you're also, number 4, allowed to re-grieve. You are encouraged, like it has to happen. And there's always another way to reframe that loss. And the last thing, number 5, I guess if we're counting, speaking the truth, no matter when you do it, decades later, doesn't make a difference, is an act of radical acceptance, which is something I talk about with my therapist a lot. So if you're hearing me right now and you know who you are, yes, that came from you. Radical acceptance can be the greatest act of healing that we can find.
Thank you so much for being so vulnerable today. And like Lisa said, if you have any questions, slide into our DMs. We're more than happy to answer any questions.
And even if you don't have a question and you just have something you want to share, we want to hear that too.
For sure. All right, Boo. So I'll see you next week.
Do you love me as much as I love you?
Maybe a little bit more. You know
Okay.
what? I'm smaller. I have a lot more love to give. So
Okay. I like that. I'll take that. I'll see you next week.
there you go. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on The Survivors. Remember, no matter how tough things feel, you are enough, and the world needs you just the way you are. You're not alone in this journey. There's a community here, and every step forward counts. We're so grateful you took the time to listen, and we hope you'll take one day at a time. Just know there's always more light ahead.
Thanks for being here, friends. Just remember, help is out there in so many different places. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 and a trained crisis counselor like me will be there to help. You can also find an inclusive and comprehensive directory of mental health resources, tools, and content at thehelphub.co. Just remember that help is always just a call or a click away. We'll catch you next week. In the meantime, keep surviving.